is Jeff Quartermaine, Chairman and CEO of Perseus Mining. He'll be having a conversation up here and a discussion with our very own Hedley Widdup, followed by a Q&A. Now, Hedley will be known to many of you, and I can tell you he certainly dislikes these types of introductions, so it's probably best if I'm brief. He's a geologist, hails from the University of Melbourne, and he's worked in some of Australia's largest mines. Since 2007, Hedley's been a part of the Lion Selection Group's mining investment team, a role for which he has become very well known for commentary surrounding the famous Lion Selection mining clock. Now that's old style but reliable. It's not type of the modern day TikTok, but still reliable. Hedley's an honorary member of the Melbourne Mining Club Steering Committee and is an experienced financial analyst for mining companies, especially in the gold sector. So he's ideal to have that chat with our keynote speaker, Jeff Quartermaine. Please welcome, as you can see, Hedley Widdup to the stage. I'd like to introduce Andrew Hall, the CEO of AMC Consultants, and ask him to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Quartermaine. Andrew.
Thank you, Gavin, and good afternoon, members and guests. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jeff Quartermaine, who has more than 35 years' experience in the resources business, holding senior corporate, financial and strategic management roles with the ASX and TSX listed resources companies with operations in Australia, as well as the Asia Pacific, South America and West Africa. He is a Fellow of the Society of Certified Practicing Accountants and holds business management and civil engineering qualifications. Having joined Perseus as Chief Financial Officer in 2010, Jeff was promoted to the role of Managing Director and CEO in February 2013. And in November 2023, he assumed the role of Executive Chairman. Jeff has played a key role in transforming Perseus from a junior exploration company into the third largest gold company listed on the ASX, with a market capitalisation of close to 2.5 billion Australian dollars. This has been achieved through a combination of organic growth, through the drill bit and development, as well as judicious M&A. The company is now a multi-mine, multi-jurisdictional gold producer, with the annual gold production exceeding 500,000 ounces per annum and an all-in sustaining cost in the bottom 10% of the global cost curve. Perseus has developed 3 gold mines, including the Edikan mine in Ghana and the Sising and Yaouré mines in Côte d'Ivoire, and is currently preparing for the development of the Kmaes Sand Gold Project in northern Sudan. The company also owns a 17% interest in the Coney Gold Project, also located in Côte d'Ivoire. Under Jeff's leadership, Perseus has cemented its position as a mid-tier gold producer in global terms, with strong cash and profit generation, and concluded 2023 with a cash and bullion balance of $642 million US dollars, no debt, and an undrawn credit facility for $300 million US dollars. Key features of Perseus are its strong corporate culture, developed over time through strict adherence to a well-defined set of corporate values, along with a sharp focus on delivering the company's corporate mission of generating material benefits for all stakeholders in fair and equitable proportions. Members and guests, please welcome Jeff Quartermaine to the Melbourne Mining Club.
Thank you. G'day, Jeff. Jeff, welcome to Melbourne and welcome on stage at the Melbourne Mining Club. It's terrific to have you here.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for having me. I mean, it's a very prestigious event and great pleasure to be part of it.
Can you start us off very briefly with just a one-liner? There's a lot of people here who would know there's a company called Perseus. What does Perseus do? What's Perseus?
Well, Perseus, as the previous speaker said, is an ASX-listed company. We're a gold producer, developer and explorer. We have a multi-mine, multi-jurisdictional portfolio that's focused purely on the African continent.
Okay, so you're in Africa. Let's start there. Quickly though, where in Africa are you, and how long has Perseus been doing that? Have you just moved in, been there for a while?
Well, we're actually got a presence in 4 countries at the present time. So, as stated earlier, our first mine was in Ghana. We have 2 operating mines in Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast. We have a development project in the Sudan, and another development project now in Tanzania that we recently acquired through some M&A activity. So we're represented in 4 different jurisdictions and 3 operating mines.
You've got substantial tenure there by the sounds of things. Maybe not so long in some countries, but across the continent, certainly. Africa is a place that I think a lot of people are going to regard with a sense of perhaps even wildness or adventure. You're a gold producer there. There's gold producers all around the world. To be a modern-day gold miner in Africa, can you talk to us a little bit about what sort of mindset you need to be that kind of operator in Africa?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and when I think about that, I mean, there's multiple words and phrases that spring to mind, including open-minded, including flexible, including disciplined and resilient. And let me explain that. I think that whenever anyone goes to a jurisdiction that they're not overly familiar with, there's an awful lot to learn. In fact, probably the most valuable thing that you do know is that you don't know. And I think you really have to approach the situation by being willing to sit and talk to people, learn things, and to adapt your model to suit the circumstances. Now, having said that, you really must know yourself, you really must know what you're about, you really must know what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, as that's an absolutely fundamental piece of how you're going to behave or execute your business. You then need to be very, very disciplined in how you go about your business, and you need to be resilient, because the one thing that you do know is that you are going to have setbacks and challenges along the way, and you need to be able to get up off your feet or be able to get back on track when you've been knocked around. So all of those things, I think, encapsulate the sort of things or the approach that you really need to take to have some success in these countries.
You're mining gold, so at the end of the day, I suspect you need to be resilient across a lot of those things, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is to be able to do that in Africa and succeed, you need to be operating in a good way. You need to be good at what you do. Is that right?
Oh, well, look, I think, the fact of the matter is that you need to be good no matter where you're located, whether you're in Australia or North America or Africa. I mean, you can run a business well or you can run it poorly. Now, we choose to run it well, and that does require a lot of hard work and a lot of effort by a lot of people, I might say, who are extremely dedicated to fitting in with our core values. And also, as part of that, one of our mantras is we do what we say we're going to do, and we do it every time. So, bringing people along on that particular journey does take some work, but it's what we've really focused on over the years.
Let me delve into this a bit, because what you've talked about there is, Africa is distant from where we are. You've got to be resilient and, responsible in the way that you do it, but stick to your guns in the way you do it. I said before, Africa might be regarded by some people as being wild or perhaps adventurous. Some people might even say dangerous. And I've heard one of your contemporaries remark, probably in a bit of an off-cuff kind of way, that when a coup happens and you see it on the news in Africa, it's described as a leadership reshuffle in Australia, that kind of thing. Does that affect the way that you do business? And perhaps in the way that you talk to this, you could just tell us about the access that you need or get to some of those leaders that get reshuffled or cooed out of the way or anything else. But is it a dangerous place?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. And I think that remark that you're quoting is a fairly flippant remark. I think anybody who operates in that part of the world would be well aware of the challenges that exist and how it actually affects our business. We decided fairly early on in the piece that being a single mine, single jurisdiction exposure was a very, very high risk way to live your life. So what we have done quite deliberately over the years is move to this situation where we have multiple mines in multiple jurisdictions, and that gives us an opportunity to take out some of the volatility in our production, some of the volatility in our earnings. I mean, look, it is fair to say that there is quite a lot of things occur in the country, and of course it does achieve media attention, and clickbait's alive and well, and so it does get some focus. But the reality is that I think that there is a mistake made in the West about forms of governance in the various countries. Now, Africa comprises 51, 52, 53 or 54 countries, depending on your definition. And a lot of those did have colonial, government going back in time. And when the colonialists left, they left behind all sorts of institutions. Now, some of those institutions function very well, some of them don't. Military is one that did always function well, pretty well, and so it is quite prominent. But I think a lot of countries have had democracy imposed upon them as the form of governance, when in fact they're used to, say, tribal leadership or military leadership. And so you can kind of see how when people are not receiving the benefits of life that they would like, they get frustrated, particularly if there's a government and a very unpopular government gets elected 98% of the vote. They tend to want to take matters into their own hands, and they tend to revert back to the traditional form of governance. Now, from an operating point of view, we work very, very closely with all of the governments, and frankly, we don't care what form it takes, so long as we can sit down, have intelligent conversations, share our views, and find a way of creating benefit all round. And I think that's what we've been quite successful at over the years.
As an Australian, travelling to Africa as the leader of a company, and then you go and have those discussions with some of those leaders of countries, what sort of perception do you think they have of you coming in? Do they say, oh, look, here's a fellow who's here to help, or is it a bit different?
Well, yes, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I think I can recount a story where I did go to see a senior leader on my first trip there, and he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, nothing. I'd like to introduce myself and pay my respects and let you know a little bit about what we do. And he said, no. He said, foreigners only, they never come here for that reason. They always want something. What do you want? I said, no, please, Minister, I'm not doing that. Anyway, I did go and see him repeatedly as I visit the countries, and over a period of time we established a level of rapport. He understood where I was coming from. I understood to a degree where he was coming from. And when the day arose when I really did need something, we were able to sit down and have a very sensible conversation and work our way forward. So, I think that this is an example of being able to communicate, or open and willing to communicate, willing to sit and listen, and to acknowledge that you're different and to respect those differences, I think is really important in trying to find a sensible way forward.
I think there must be some leaders of Australian-focused gold miners that would be quite jealous of that ability to talk to a minister on a one-on-one basis and have that respect develop, and then be able to have licences that come to them from that respect that's developed. But we might come back to that, because what I'd like to push into is one thing that comes to mind when you're an investor looking into Africa is that maybe it's not across the board, and it certainly seems to vary. There are a growing number of countries where some sort of national free carry is required, and it might be known up front, but it comes to bear when you're signing off permits or development permits are getting issued. So in some cases, I think it might be that there's a going rate. In other cases, it might be more like there's a negotiation, but it's a cost of doing business, perhaps. What's your experience been with that process and the fairness of free carrying a national government? Because it's something that Australians look at and say that's different, but you must have a perspective because you've done this.
Yeah, look, I don't have any problem whatsoever with that. In fact, I'm actually very pleased when governments take an interest in the project, because they've got some serious skin in the game at that particular time. And, it boils down to the point that, look, I don't know if it was ever okay, but if it was ever okay when a foreign company turned up, exploited the natural heritage of that company and took all the benefits away, if that was ever okay, it's certainly not the case now. And I think that people do need to recognise that what we are doing is going and using up very scarce natural resources that belong to the people of that country. And so they must get a fair share of what's going to happen. Now, in our case, I think we do deserve to be rewarded for the capacity and intellectual property that's involved in monetising that scarce resource. But we have to recognise that all of the stakeholders need to receive benefits. So, in the case of a government having a free interest, that's fine. They're incentivised to help us get the project moving forward. But at the same time, we need to allow enough free cash available to provide benefits to communities, to employees, suppliers of goods and services, not to mention, of course, our financiers, our shareholders. And if everybody isn't getting a fair piece of the action, then it won't be a sustainable position. So, we're quite comfortable with that. And I would say this, that, if you were to look at an African company, say a company in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, and map out, well, what happens to the revenue that you generate, and you see the various splits. And if you did the same thing for an Australian company, I dare say that the Australian government, etc., does not miss out. They just take it in different forms. And similarly, it'd be quite an interesting exercise to do. I think probably, the employees would take a bigger cut than they might in an African setting. Certainly, probably our contribution to community is probably greater than Australia, although, in some parts of Australia where there are land rights, committees or whatever, lots of money goes back there too. So I think it's different. But it's not any worse in Africa than it is anywhere else, for that matter, I would think.
I think there's a few members of the media here today. I suspect some of them might like to run with that. Anyone want to put their hands up for a headline tomorrow? The tax take, the overall take, Africa is about the same as Australia. I'd love to hear that explored. And I've often wondered that myself.
Sorry, just to interrupt. I didn't say the tax take. If I did, I apologise. I think the proportion of benefits that go to the host country is what I'm talking about. It may take the form of taxation, or it may take the form of royalty, or some kind of a levy, or whatever the case is, but it's not tax per se.
Yep. In each place you work, you're paying people as well. And I guess if you look into the benefits which are derived by wherever you're working, whether it's Victoria or Australia or anywhere else, you can't fix the cost of employing people, your entire workforce up front. So I guess there's one contrast here, which is if you were mining gold in Western Australia over the last 4 years, your experience might have been that you have to pay people a certain amount to have them on your workforce, but then on any given fly-in day, 30% of them might not turn up. They've decided to go somewhere else. So I guess that's a big cost which imposes itself on a business as well. And I don't know if, I guess my perception is that a tier one country flip side of the coin of this, working in foreign countries where there is a free carry, where workforces and governments behave differently in the way that they're collecting that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not an expert in the mining industry in Australia necessarily, having focused outside for a long time, but I think that is a very pertinent point. The turnover of staff in Australia, I would venture to suggest, is a lot higher than in Africa, because, quite frankly, our people are paid very well, relative to other people in the country. So if somebody gets a job at a mining operation, they hang on to it, for dear life, because that is the opportunity for them to set their family up. I think in Australia, people are probably a little less committed in that respect. And this is a general statement. And of course, also too, the social security networks in Australia are pretty strong as well. They often don't exist. So, there is that cost, the cost of replacing people. I think one of the other costs that Australia probably sees that may not get discussed as much is in the safety area. And what I've noticed, just observing my colleagues in the West Australian industry, for instance, is that over the last couple of years, there seems to me to have been an increase in the number of incidents and even fatalities where, the very strong safety protocols and training and culture that existed when the workforce was more stable is more difficult to maintain when people are constantly turning over. So look, there's pros and cons about, the various arrangements. I guess the other side of that, you might say, well, a standing cost in Africa is that Australians don't see as security. And absolutely, yes, we do maintain a security setup that we believe is important, to ensure that our people are at all times safe and secure, and that the assets are safe and secure. Whether you need it or not, I'm not sure necessarily. We've never really needed it, but it is something that we do.
When you talk to investors and your shareholders even about this concept of the free carry, I just want to come back to that for a second. they must invest globally. I tend to think if they're investing in ASX on a top 3 gold producer listed on ASX company, that they probably have other gold holdings elsewhere. How do you tell them? How do you talk to them about the benefits of this partnering with a government in country? You talked a lot about them having skin in the game. I'm just wondering if that's something which investors can see almost eye to eye on. Do they see it that way?
Look, I can't possibly say what's in the mind of investors. Let me assure you.
Might not be there for very long.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
no, let me assure you, it changes from day to day. I mean, certainly, look, geopolitical risk is something that's front and centre with a lot of investors, whether it relates to carried interests or whether it relates to headlines around coup d'etat or something like that. I don't really know. But, it is something that we need to work through, and we do our best to communicate to our stakeholders about what happens and what can go right and what can go wrong.
You talked before about your workforce and the opportunity. I think maybe I'm extrapolating this. When you work in a community in a place like some of the countries in Africa that you're in, there's an opportunity to train these people, not just for their safety at work, but for the rest of their career, because that might very well be what they're launching and they'll stay with you for a period of time. We've got a table of students here who are preparing themselves for a career here as well, so some of this might rub off on them. But I think wherever you work in the world, whether it's Victoria, Western Australia, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Sudan, you probably have to have the same mentality. But what's the Perseus secret sauce in terms of how you approach people and communities, particularly as you're going into these places for the first time or quite early on?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a secret sauce per se, but I will say this. You can have the best asset in the world, the most money, the most intelligent and capable workforce, but if you don't have a social licence to operate, if you're not welcome in that village, let alone in that country, then I can tell you've got nothing. And we know that as a fact, and we put a lot of effort into it. So we spell ESG differently to everybody else. It's small e, capital S, small g. It's not to say environment and governance is not important. They are. They're very important. But the S piece is the one that we put a lot of effort into. And I'm very pleased to say that we do make some important contributions to our host communities. And in fact, it's one of the, I see it as one of the real privileges of my job, is that I have the opportunity to, through our company and through our shareholders' benevolence, I suppose you'd say, because they fund it ultimately, to make some real differences to the lives of people. For instance, you mentioned safety. We have a thing called our SHED program, Safely Home Every Day. Now, in places like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, the concept of safety is pretty foreign, really. When you drive down the street, some of the things you see people doing as part of their daily life, turns your hair grey or make falls out. So the fact that we can educate people that there is a standards that you really need to be mindful of, not only when you're at work, but when you get on that motorbike to ride yourself home, and when you're at home, and when you come back. And I think that that's a very minor way of contributing to their well-being. But beside that, we do a lot of work in terms of education, health, things like that go completely under the radar. But we're very pleased to do it.
I've got one more question on Africa, because I want to talk about Perseus after that. We haven't even got to that yet, but fascinating place. So let's finish up. You've been in Africa for 20 years now, from what you said before. What's the reason you've stayed there? And I guess, and you've been in this role a while too, Jeff, leading the company. What are the great talking points on Africa? I've focused a bit too much on the negatives here, but you've pointed towards some really great things as well.
Oh, well, as I said, I think that being in a position where you can actually contribute to the development and growth of a country is an enormous privilege. And so that's something that motivates all of us, I'm very sure. But look, let's be brutally honest about it. It's a great opportunity. There's a lot of fantastic mineral resources in the country, and opportunity for companies like ours if we go about it in an appropriate way, which involves ensuring benefits all round.
We organised a meeting of the Fed for yesterday so that we would have a bit of a gold bump today. So let's talk about value creation. And, you're a gold miner. Gold has a lot to do with that. But Perseus strikes me as an interesting company. We've seen a lot of rejuvenation of portfolios in a lot of the Australian companies that I look at. Perseus has grown from foundation assets in some cases. I think one of those started as an anomaly. I was reading your prospectus from 2004 the other day. It's grown, the name of the project has changed, but it's in the same place. It became a mine, and Perseus has acquired resources along the way as well. So you've acquired and you've developed. People across the market say M&A and development of projects is a great way to destroy capital. You've got to be very careful with it, but it's certainly not a pattern which a lot of other companies have engaged in over a long period of time. Yet Perseus shares have gone up 10 times almost in 10 years, which is a remarkable performance of share price, and people still say you're undervalued, so there's more to go. There's two facets of that. Targeting acquisitions at pre-development stage, resource stage, and then taking on the development burden, which isn't just funding, it's the stress and everything else of building a project. How has Perseus made that work for you?
Well, look, my view is that the best value method of creating value for shareholders is to explore and find mineral resources next to an existing facility. Now, you can do that to some degree, although ultimately it starts to wear out. I mean, one of the things we're very pleased about is the fact that our reserve inventory at the end of 2023 was the same as it was at the end of 2018, having replaced everything that we'd depleted over that period of time. But look, the idea of acquiring assets to supplement the organic growth is pretty important, really. You're right, we do tend to focus on the pre-development assets because we believe that in terms of value creation, outside of that discovery next to your mill, that's the best way of going about it, particularly when you have the sorts of capabilities that we have. I mean, we have financial capabilities, but perhaps more importantly, we've got very good engineering skills, we've got development skills, et cetera, and we now have a track record of having built 3 operations over a period of time. The first one, we probably made every mistake in the book, but we've learnt from that, and the next 2 have been terrific. So we are getting better as we go, and we are creating value through that process. I mean, into the development stage itself, well, that's an interesting thing in itself because, there's no substitute for preparation and making sure that, you do your homework very soundly and you take the right attitude to development. I think that, the landscape's littered with companies that have been undercapitalised or under-engineered in their projects and the chickens have come home to roost. So we take a fair bit of time to make sure we get it right. I say to the guys when we're doing that planning, if they want to do this or they want to do that, I say to them, okay, well, bear in mind, lads, we're not in the business of building monuments, we're in the business of making money machines. Is that going to enhance our outcomes or not? And if it does, tell me the return on that additional piece now. And then we work through and say, yep, well, we'll do it or we'll do it later on. So you need to be thoughtful about it. I think, there's no magic pudding here. I mean, there's a lot of hard work. But, that's what we do, I suppose.
Let me delve into that a little bit more because you've just gained the ascendancy in what became, I think, a fairly well publicised takeover deal for OreCorp. I think one particular podcast might have described it as the Battle of Nyanzaga, which I'm pretty sure isn't the way that they pronounce it in Tanzania. But this will be the largest acquisition that Perseus has ever made. Again, though, fits the template perfectly in that it's pre-development. You can sort of cast the asset as you'd like it to be. And I've heard you say that Perseus can be the best custodian of that asset. I presume you're a pretty good chess player or maybe poker player from the way that this has played out. But other than capital, what qualifies you to say that you could be the best custodian of this? And I mean that in a couple of ways. First of all, what is it about Perseus? But you're casting yourself as separate from some of your contemporaries here in that there was a competing bidder. There are other gold miners in Africa. You have the ascendancy.
Well, I think in saying that, I mean, we were referring to 3 things. One is quite clearly we have the financial capability to fund it without having to resort to external finance and the like, which meant that we could take the project forward very quickly, which aligns with the requirement of the Tanzanian government, I should say, getting my pronunciations correct here. So that was an important point. But the other thing is that we do have a development team. We now, had things been as we planned, we would have been developing a project in Sudan right now. Unfortunately, hostilities broke out there in April last year and are still ongoing. And so we have a development team ready and able to move straight into that project in Tanzania and to get moving. So we have the internal capacity to build that project and then to operate it. But I think the other piece, and this is the piece that did appeal to the Tanzanian government when we discussed this, was that we have been on the African continent for quite a long time. We do understand how to operate in that particular setting, and I think that is something that's terribly important, particularly for Tanzania, because they do very strongly believe that their people need to be partners in these businesses and do need to receive, appropriate returns for it. I mean, going back to their original president, who was very deeply into that sort of thinking, this is very much aligned with that. So I think when you stack us up against some of the other people that were floating around, I mean, I've got absolutely no doubt that the things we brought to the table were important, and of course we were offering cash, which is pretty hard to turn down too.
Particularly US dollar cash. I think that's what your bank account is denominated in. Andrew said before $642 billion worth, which would be wonderful. I know it's a big M rather than a big B, but that's a serious war chest for deploying.
Well, that's what it was in December. It's a lot more than that now, I think. We are actually accumulating a lot of cash on a daily basis. So, but the question of deployment is the challenge.
Yep. Perseus trades on a lower multiple. I don't want to make this sound offensive, but trades on a lower multiple to a lot of your international mining peers. And I think that's an African thing. I don't think it's a Perseus thing. You've also got that exceptional cash position. There's a lot of free advice you can get off of podcasts these days, corporate advice, all sorts of things, and there's industry commentators with no shortness of opinion after 5 minutes of consideration about what you should or shouldn't do with that. I think quite a few of them would have you address the situation you're in by putting out big dividends, putting out big buybacks, and certainly doing that before you start to embark on any kind of growth. So I guess whilst you're amongst friends here in Melbourne, do you have anything to say to the chattering classes about capital management, and particularly about how you might deal with dividends, distributions, or investing in growth?
Well, all I can say is that it is a very important subject now, given where we sit with our balance sheet. But look, the thing is this, that it's all very well for people to say, use all your money to buy a share buyback and all the rest of it, but the fact is, we do work with depleting resources, and there will be a time when those resources no longer exist, so the business will disappear if we don't invest money in continuing to grow the business as we, put to give continuity going forward and consistency of returns. So that is an important point. I think to say that just forget about growth and just give it all back to us, that is pretty short-sighted. In terms of how we go about the distribution of cash and capital, I mean, we do pay dividends, and we've done that for some time. We pay a base level of dividend, and each year we've paid a bonus on top of that. Now, come the August, when we're starting to look at our current year profits, et cetera, we'll have a look at how much cash have we got on board, how much do we need in the short term, how much are we going to be generating, what are our medium-term requirements, and we'll look at all that and say, well, actually, there is surplus available here. What's the most efficient way of returning that to shareholders? Now, the fact is that we have shareholders in the United States, we have them in Australia, we have them in UK, Europe, and everybody's got a different tax position and everyone's got a different piece of advice as to how we should deal with them. Mm-hmm. What we have to do is to sit down and methodically work our way through, sensibly consider it, and do what we think is going to do the best thing for all of our shareholders.
I think we've got time for one more question from me before we turn it over to the floor, and I'm sure there'll be some good ones from there. Let me set you a short-term runway or a medium-term runway. You've been with Perseus a bit over 10 years, tremendous shareholder return in that time, paid a few dividends, but you've also not only gone from the project portfolio you had to a bigger portfolio, and now Tanzania, Sudan coming through. So set yourself a medium-term outlook. What does the future look like for Perseus, Jeff?
Well, look, I think it's looking very, very good, to be honest. I mean, all of the ingredients that I think you need for long-term success are present, and it's up to the team to be able to take to the next level. And that's something that we're working at very, very hard. I mean, we made an announcement this morning of a new director on our board, part of the overall succession planning that we're seeking to do to ensure that we have the horsepower in-house to go from where we are to where we should be. And, as I say, the ingredients are in place, and it really is a case of watch this space.
Jeff, congratulations on all of that success. I think the way that you talk and describe how Perseus does business in Africa is marvellous. I think it'd be terrific if people around the world, no matter where they are, were operating in the same way. And I congratulate you on everything you've achieved at Perseus. So that's it from me. Folks, please thank Jeff before we turn it over to questions from the floor, would you?
Microphones, thank you. Yep, we've got Richard Shoddy over here, Sam Street over here. Questions from the floor. When you do have a question, would you please stand up so we can see you and just let us know who you are and perhaps your affiliation. All yours, please.
Hi, Angie Ellis, very happy shareholder over here on the investigator table. Had to give Andrew a plug. Thank you very much for that update. I just had a question, Jeff, regarding Rick Manell, the new appointment to the board, and how did that come about and what does he bring to Perseus?
Well, you know, Rick, we announced that appointment this morning. Rick is an outstanding human being. He has a very strong sense of Africa in his DNA. He's been chair of, or deputy chair of, a number of major African companies. But I think, as importantly, Rick really understands, he gets Africa, he gets the ESG piece, and he's got his history of work in the social space is enormous. I mean, it's actually quite embarrassing when you look at some of the things that gentleman has done. And I think his breadth of experience in a mining sense, but also his breadth of experience in a cultural sense, is going to bring a new perspective to our board that I think will be really very, very important in helping us, as I said earlier, to take that next step to where we should be.
Okay, Sam?
Hi, my name's Amanda Harsis. I'm the Finance Director of Atlantic Lithium. We'll have the first lithium project and mine in Ghana, so fully appreciate the West African perspective and agree all around. My question is more around investors and the future of investing, and this is kind of a little opinion I have just by travelling over the last 2 years through conferences and seeing, I suppose, the stereotypical investor. I have 3 children that are in their early 20s, and their concept of investing in gold and investing even in, mining and commodities is completely different to what I grew up with. So do you have an opinion around the kind of next generation of investor? Do you think the gold prices are kind of getting limited by, I think the crypto has kind of come in and it's impacted their lives. My son made a lot of money on that. I don't personally understand it, but is that changing the investor's perspective of gold and then minerals in general?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? And I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment on that. But look, gold does have a sense of source of value, and every cultural setting is different. I mean, people certainly in China and India and in the Middle East have a very different view to probably people in Melbourne and Sydney. So, look, I think that it will continue to be valued. And I think there's enough going on in the world right now for people to be looking for stores of value. I look forward to, well, actually, I don't look forward to the day at all. I don't want to death ride the world, but crypto would be great, except what happens when the lights go out? It could be a bit of an interesting thing as opposed to having a gold bar under your bed. But look, I honestly don't know the answer to that. Things change every day, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Richard, how are you looking? Oh, right, okay, the students' table. Thanks, Sam, you've got this.
Hi, hi, my name is Kerry. I'm from Monash University. I've just got a question regarding Perseus, I guess, like the workforce and in terms of future talents. I think this might have been touched on previously in the in the conversation, but so from a personal experience working in the mining industry and sort of talking to people in more senior people in the industry as well, a lot of mining companies whose bases in Australia have say, for example, if they have an operation in the PNG or something like that, their workforce, especially in the management and the more highly skilled personnel in the company, work on a FIFO arrangement. So, for example, they'll be based out in Brisbane, and then they'll do a 2-2 or 3-3 roster, flying to Port Moresby, and then go into the mine site and stuff. So, I guess my question is like for Perseus, is your vision for your future workforce something that's mostly sourced from, like say for the engineering talents, are they mostly going to be sourced from local universities in Africa, or do you sort of more envision them being like, or you sort of like recruiting mining talents from all over the world and then flying them to your mine sites in Africa, like, which, like,
Yeah.
I guess that's my question there, yeah.
Okay, good question. I mean, look, what we actually do is we have a very small office in Australia, and most of our activity is on the African continent. I mean, we work very, very hard to transition from having expatriates flying in and out to using local people. And, we have a plan right from the get-go to make sure that happens. And in fact, in Ghana, for instance, we have 0 expatriates on our workforce, and that includes from the general manager down. So all of the people that work for us in Ghana come from local universities, et cetera, et cetera. In some of the other mining jurisdictions where there's less of a history of mining and mining education, we do still have a number of expatriates coming in and out. But it is very much our wish to be able to hand over to local professionals and let them run the business for us. So we don't if there is a bias, that's where we would go. In fact, I was saying to someone earlier today, in our recruitment policy, there is only one element of bias shown in our selection right across the board, and that is that if we've got 2 people applying for a job, one of them comes from the local area, one of them comes outside. If they're the same, the local person gets a job every time. And that's a position that we run with, and we're very proud that we have been able to contribute to those countries by training people and leaving behind sets of skills that are transferable.
Okay, Richard, we've got time for 2 more questions. So, Richard, you've got one here from Dave Clark.
Dave Clark from GHD. Well done, Jeff, and thanks to yourself and Hedley for the conversation. On the all-important ESG sort of topic, you reinforced the social side of things in particular. I was just curious to understand through your journey some of the lessons that you might have learnt, or how that approach to the social side perhaps has changed over time. Thank you. Changed or improved or strengthened. Thanks.
Yeah, look, I mean, it has been a bit of a learning exercise for us. I mean, and it constantly evolves, I've got to say. I mean, one of the challenges is that we, in what we do in the communities, we want to empower people. We want them ultimately to make those decisions. We don't want to be making them on behalf of people, but bringing them along that journey and making sure that money, for instance, goes where it needs to go and things like that is quite a challenge at times. But no, look, I think that's been quite successful. I mean, it's always really quite enlightening when you go out and you sit down with the local chiefs and have a talk to them about what they really want out of things. And quite often what we find out is what they want is quite different to what the government wants. We had a situation in Ghana, for instance, where we relocated about 200 odd people, and we had to build these houses that were prescribed by legislation which was probably written by somebody in, I don't know, Sweden or Norway or something or other. Was that what the local people wanted? Probably not, but we did it anyway. Now in Tanzania it's quite different actually. The Tanzanians are a bit further along the curve, and they can take a choice as to how they receive the benefits. So we are evolving, we're learning new things every day actually as we go forward, and it is important. It goes right back to the point that I made at the outset. You need to be willing to sit down and listen to people, and you'll be surprised by what you learn.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Sam, one last question just here.
Jeff, Michael Hudson from Southern Cross Gold. You show great leadership, so thank you very much for what you're doing for the industry. Good job, Hedley, too. My question is, we focused on very much the local side and think local, act global, and I notice you're dual listed. And there's a little bit of vested interest in my question here, if anyone knows me, but interested in your perspective of investors here in Australia and in North America, the similarities and differences and where you focus.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. How long have you got? I mean, we did list in Toronto back at 10 years ago or so, and it was at a time when mining was flavour of the month in Canada in particular, and we did raise a lot of money that funded the development of our first project. I mean, over time, mining's fallen off the perch, and firstly marijuana, then cryptocurrency, and God knows whatever else. So they're certainly very fashion orientated, let me assure you, and come and go. I think one of the things, and this is not geographically orientated, but the biggest change I think that I've seen in the investment area over the time I've been involved is, the swing from active investment to passive investment. And we've got a very high quality group of active investors on our register who look at the situation and make very informed decisions about their investment. But we also have a lot of passive money there too, which does knock the share price around quite a lot. So, US farm incomes might rise or fall. That flips into the Dow Jones index, which flips into the ASX 200, the next morning, and we have to dig ourselves out of a hole or not, as the case may be. So I think that is probably the biggest difference that I've noticed over time. But, as to, attitudes, et cetera, I think the Australians are probably a bit parochial in a way, like they're not that enamoured by Africa, mainly because they don't really understand what's going on. And, gatherings like this, I think, are enormously important to be able to share some views which hopefully will help people be a little less anxious around it. I certainly think the Europeans, the British get Africa a lot better, and the Americans, well, they work north-south and they've got plenty of options in their own backyard. So, look, you can't generalise about anything. We work as closely as we can with our shareholders. We keep them as informed as we can possibly do. And, of course, they make their own decisions.
Okay, thanks for that question, Mike, and thanks, Jeff, for those candid answers that you've given us. Members and guests, would you please welcome John Tivy, partner at White & Case, to join me on stage here and deliver a vote of thanks. John Tivy. Thanks, Tiv.
Thank you, Gavin. Members and guests, on behalf of the Melbourne Mining Club, I have the privilege of thanking Jeff for the discussion today. First, though, I'd like to thank Hedley for leading the fireside chat. Your passion is self-evident, and you obviously put a huge effort into your preparation for today. And I must say there were whispers on the floor that we're witnessing the emergence of the next Michael Parkinson. Jeff, we appreciate your insights into the successful execution of business in Africa, the need for resilience, ensuring the quality of what you do, and the need to deliver on promises, to do what you say you will do, as you put it. The discussion around free carried interests in African jurisdictions and the broader stakeholder benefits your operations provide, and the role of this in your social licence to operate was illuminating. Members and guests, please join me in thanking the Chairman and CEO of Perseus, Jeff Quartermaine, for his insights today.
Hedley, like Michael Parkinson, enjoys red wine. So you can hand that to Hedley.
Thanks, Michael. I'll ask you later who he is. Thanks, Kev.
Thank you very much. Oh, I see.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks also to Hedley, and like Michael Parkinson, I'm sure he enjoys a red wine. All right, well, let's all have a seat, and I'm sure, Jenny, you'll be chasing for the next part on that. Just to close off, members and guests, we're delighted to announce that the new and updated Melbourne